Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spark My Muse. I am your host, Lisa Colon DeLay. Today, I want to talk about this dynamic connection between our health and well-being and our ability to be flexible. So I'll open with a question like this. How do you feel when you make a mistake? I don't mean a little mistake like you just say the wrong thing, but like kind of a whopper, a big old mistake that's clearly your fault. This was such a challenge for me, and I remember being really scolded and screamed at for making mistakes as a kid. If I did something just even accidentally, like I lost my hairbrush, I spilled some milk at the table, the screaming would ensue, and I would just turn all that upset inward. I felt a lot of self-hatred. I felt a lot of shame. So when I made a mistake, I wanted to sort of hide from the mistake or not claim responsibility, pretend it didn't happen or avoid it. It just felt so awful, so many negative feelings. But what all the research shows is that flexibility is a hallmark of healthy or healed people and personalities. Until I healed from the trauma of self-hate, until I healed from some of that trauma of anger toward me that turned into self-hate, it was difficult for me to be flexible. I would be rigid. Things would have to be a certain way. If I made a mistake, there was no flexibility in my personality to adjust to that and to not go into some sort of shame spiral. And people who have mental illness, mental challenges, mental disorders, they tend to be very rigid. And that's not to say that there is anything wrong with them at the core, but these challenges or these traumas that they've incurred over the years often turn into rigidity as a coping mechanism. The brain sort of hardens into seeing things just one way. It is not able to adapt and learn in the same way as an untraumatized brain. I think of my son who has autism, and he's an adult now. And as he's gotten more, you could say, rehabilitated into normal functioning as an adult, he's become more flexible. It used to be that getting him to wear short sleeves when he was wearing long sleeves in the winter was an unbelievable Herculean task. And he cried and he threw fits. And through desensitizing him and his senses, his brain was perceiving things so extra. And his rigidity was so much so that it really impaired his functioning. And by some exposure therapy, which included just him understanding his senses better, feeling things, allowing himself to be okay and calm down in a normal way, slowly made it possible for him to endure many things that he was too inflexible to endure before. Too many things would induce a total meltdown. And some of us who aren't on the autism spectrum or not deep into it as much can also relate to being sometimes inflexible. Maybe something doesn't go our way and we're in a bad mood all day. Or maybe we hear an answer we don't like, or we have trouble adjusting when circumstances change. I think it's just very important to revisit our own levels of flexibility, especially as we age, because as we age, sometimes we become less flexible, we become more rigid. And I really do think that is because the brain begins to deteriorate over time with age. It doesn't have to deteriorate at that rate, but it certainly is indicative of a lot of the people I know who are elderly. And I work with exclusively now with an elderly population, and I can see how their rigidity brings them extra suffering and hardships when perhaps introducing ideas like what if, or is this the worst thing that can happen to me today, and trying to put things into perspective can help people begin to cope and become more flexible. One of the things I had to learn in my healing journey, if you will, was just the ability to laugh at myself, to not take it so hard that I made a mistake, to not let it make me think there was something just inherently wrong with me, that I had made a mistake, but I myself was not a mistake. And I just couldn't do this until I found in my nervous system the kind of stability and security and peace that could induce healing toward this. Otherwise, when I made an error, something embarrassing or something that made me seem foolish, I just felt swept up into a kind of tidal wave tsunami of shame and negative feelings. I wanted to run and hide, or I wanted to make an excuse or blame, and I would get upset and angry, and that would turn inward. And I find myself at my job now, when I make a mistake, which happens frequently, is to just laugh it off and think, oh, that was pretty silly, but so what? I can just move on. And I find that when I'm in a stressful situation, that of course, my rigidity can rear its head, but that I can question it. And it's just been such a journey to get there where I am now, where I feel really at peace with myself when I make an error or mistake. I don't have to feel so bad. And I wanted to share some of the ways I did that, some of these concrete ways, and maybe it'll help you, or maybe it'll help somebody you know. And I don't know who hears this in a typical week, maybe nobody. But it's possible that you've journeyed down this road too, or that you find things to be upsetting and you feel like you need things a certain way. This kind of obsessive compulsiveness that can become disordered. And I'm not saying that all these things can be magically cured, but I do think we can kind of rehab ourselves in a way to experience life with more. As I'm trying to record this, my cat has spilled over an entire water bottle full of coconut water, and now I have to be very flexible in how I clean it up and how I move on from this moment, because it's very frustrating when something like this happens, but at the same time, I'm not going to let it really bother me, because the cat didn't do it on purpose. It was just exploring, and getting mad about it won't make any difference at all. Won't help me feel better. It won't help the cat feel better. So, just as I'm recording this, my cat spills over my water bottle full of coconut water all over the carpet and the hardwood floor. And I have to adjust and just be regulated and not really worry about it. It's a disappointment. I'm laughing about it because it's just so strange. But I know if something like that happened when I was growing up, my mother, who was, I guess, living out of trauma that she experienced, she would flip her lid every time things like this happened, things that were unexpected, whether they were intentional mistakes, but often they were just unintentional ones, like someone knocking something over, like my cat just did. And she had no ability to regulate. She was kind of very emotionally immature. And I picked up on that, and I imitated this immaturity. And it took me a long time to realize how to regulate my emotions and not to think of every mistake as a failure or as a catastrophe of some kind. And some of the ways that I found some healing in this aspect that made me more flexible, made me more healed, was that I realized there's many things, or maybe most things, that I just can't control. I can't control if the cat knocks over my water bottle. And getting upset about it doesn't mean I have more control. It means really I have less control because my emotions aren't even under control. And it doesn't mean I don't have to feel things. I can feel upset and I can feel hijacked a little bit. But what will I allow myself to do under that? Will I let myself take an inventory of it and just put things into perspective? All is not lost. Things will be okay. I have also learned something that was just so hard in coming to me about being gracious to myself and compassionate. I think my self-hatred, which I struggle with for decades, it made me very sort of self-punishing. So when you have real compassion and love for yourself and you think of yourself compassionately, it makes you so much more generous to others. I didn't feel like yelling at my kids when they made a mistake because I knew that most mistakes were unintentional, and the ones that were intentional could be dealt with differently than just by exploding. And I remember one time I didn't do it very well. My daughter dropped something I think a glass of water all over the place. And I went, Ellie, what's going on? And she goes, Mom, I didn't do it on purpose. And she said it to me in the most calm way. That is something I would have never been able to do to my own mother because I would have been so terrified of her response and reaction. I would have been afraid of physical violence, but certainly afraid of that emotional violence of being yelled at and feeling very small and overwhelmed. And so others can mess up in my presence, and I will not take it out on them. I will not make them feel afraid. Another thing I learned is just to not worry about the error itself, especially if it was unintentional. If that can be communicated, say, to a boss or coworker or family member, but nevertheless, owning up to that mistake right away. Don't let it fester. And then just take action right away to remedy it, rectify it, to make amends, or to start over. And when you take responsibility right away, you take ownership of the error and the mistake right away, it lets the pressure out. You don't play a blame game. People can feel safe in your presence, knowing that you take responsibility and you don't defer the fault to others and you don't put the blame on others so that they are unsafe. That you take full responsibility, even sometimes when it is not entirely your fault, but that you have a certain degree of ability to remedy it. So often shame will keep us stuck in inaction, and it will keep us stuck from making amends with other people or making things right or taking action that can make a situation better. We will freeze up when we feel afraid or ashamed. And in those ways, when we freeze up, this is a kind of level of inflexibility and rigidity that is indicative of an unhealthy or unhealed personality. And so we can go into the world working on our personalities, working on how we relate to others, working on gaining stability in our emotional world and in our networked, interactive world with others. How will people respond to us when we are responding to our mistakes and errors? And what I've learned is that when I give myself grace and I give other people grace in their mistakes, not hold it over them or blame them or make a big point about it, that when I make a mistake, that is returned to me, that favor is returned to me, that grace comes back home. For that, I am so grateful. It's taken decades to learn. I feel fairly assured that I can handle many, many things I could not handle before in terms of making errors and mistakes. I hope this is enlightening in some way. I would love to hear how you respond to your world with flexibility, or when under stress, do you become inflexible? How does that look? What are the specifics about that? I would love to hear that. And I hope that when you hear this, you see yourself in it, or maybe you can respond to it or aspire to it. And I thank you so much for listening. May you have blessing and peace.